This is The Comics Alternative, episode 189, a discussion of the 2016 Eisner nominations. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And as we do every year, Andy and I are going to be discussing the current year's nominees for the Eisner Awards. But before we get to that, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of The Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off cover price, and every single month you're going to find some wonderful specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off the cover price, sometimes at 50% off cover, but often the discounts can become more impressive than that.
That's right, and this month, as in every month, they have a load of bundles that you can take advantage of where you can get deeper discounts on multiple comics from the same publisher than you'd get if you bought those comics individually. And this month they have several bundles from DC, including the new DC Universe Rebirth launch, DC Kids, Vertigo, Marvel has their Marvel Kids bundle, and Aftershock and Valiant also have bundles, so check those out.
That's right. You can't go wrong by getting any kind of special at Discount Comic Book Service, and they have a lot. You got to check out their website to see what they have. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs, and after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
And Andy, you know, we have another sponsor for the podcast that also offers great discounts, and that is Just Coffee Co-op. It's a great place to get your coffee, tea, and chocolates. All their coffee is 100% fair trade, it's shade-grown, and it's organic certified. Everything is roasted to order. They do everything in small batches. There's no mass production whatsoever.
That's right, and if you go to their website, justcoffee.coop, and place an order, you can enter the coupon code COMICS and get 10% off your order. And as usual, shipping is free.
That's right. That's justcoffee.coop, a great place to get caffeinated. Well, Andy, it's that time of the year. Last month, they announced the nominees for the Eisner Awards. And, you know, there's always something to talk about there. And, you know, we've been wanting to do this show for a while. This year, we wanted to bring in someone fresh from the jury, in fact. This is Carol Tilley. She's an associate professor at the University of Illinois, and she was the scholar that was there as one of the 6 jurors. And, you know, we wanted to talk with her about the process to give us a view of things from the inside without giving anything away that she shouldn't.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, ever since they started having, you know, a scholar on the committee, it's been interesting. We've kind of speculated on what they might be doing and what goes on in there, and so this is a good chance to get to talk to somebody who was on the ground.
That's right, and it's really enlightening what she talks with us about. Now we should let listeners know that this episode basically is going to be in 2 parts, and this first part is what we're setting up now, our conversation with Carol Tilley. But then after we do that, then Andy and I will come back and talk about our thoughts of this year's nominees.
That's right. So we're here today with Carol Tilley, who is a library and information science faculty member at the University of Illinois, and more importantly for our discussion today, was one of the judges this year on the 2016 Eisner Award nominations, and also an outstanding comic scholar. And so we're glad to have you here, Carol.
Hey, thank you very much, Andy.
Yeah, and welcome back to the show, because you were on last year when we had that Librarians and Comics Roundtable.
I was indeed, and it's great to be back along to talk about the Eisners today.
Yeah, and so we have you back in another capacity, but we want to let you know up front that we're not here to ask you questions about the down and dirty inside scoop of what goes on, in the jury of the Eisners. But I know that Andy and I have talked about Eisner nominations ever since we've started the podcast. But we can only speak as an outsider looking in, and I'm just wondering, what was it like to be asked to be one of the jurors this year? I mean, as because you were someone from the outside looking in, now you've looked in.
I know, I have looked in, and Derek, it's all I can say is that it was an amazing experience, and it was to be an Eisner judge is something that was on my bucket list, but I wasn't sure that I was ever going to be able to cross it off. And now I have, and I'm a little bit sad that I won't ever get to do it again. But I can tell you that it was a lot of work. A lot of fun, and I think that for me, I learned a lot in the process. I mean, I read a lot of comics anyway, but this really pushed me to read even more broadly across, this tremendous wealth of contemporary comics publishing that we have, and I walked away with a deeper appreciation of the industry and the people who are part of it.
Now, when you got that call to do the Eisner judging, did you immediately start kind of thinking about the things you wanted to be looking at and wanted to be reading in order to prepare yourself?
I did. I was asked to serve on the Eisner jury in early October of last year, and so that gave me about a 6-month window to really plan my reading. And I began to think about how I wanted to restructure my reading, and the biggest issue was just simply reading more and more and more than what I would have normally. But as the end of the year sort of best of list began to come out, those of us on the judging panel began to compile those and use those as maybe the initial pass on what we wanted to read. And then in the winter, when the open call for nominations went out and publishers and creators began sending in their works, we got copies of all of those letters of nomination so we could begin to direct our reading towards what had been nominated, in addition to just the more broad array of stuff generally that might not have been nominated, but we wanted to be sure was included for consideration generally.
So you talked about you're normally an avid comics reader. How ramped up did your reading get once you became a juror? In other words, how much time were you spending reading everything that you felt that you needed to read?
I was spending probably 2 to 3 hours a day, and some days much more than that. It was a little bit tricky trying to do that in addition to working full time. I was lucky to be on sabbatical for the fall semester, so I had a little bit of extra time maybe to do some reading. But no, I was easily 2 to 3 hours a day. Anytime I could cram stuff in, whether it was on the bus or if I had, 10 free minutes to reward myself after, doing hard emails I didn't want to do or something like that, then that was time to read a comic. And so even with all of that reading, though, and some bigger binges, by the time we all met together in San Diego in early April to sort of do the ballot nominations and work through that, there were still lots of comics that all of us needed to take a look at, and so we did a lot of cramming, a lot of reading, and it allowed us to, I think, have some really good discussions because we all came in prepared, but we all did really hard work once we were together in the same space too.
So cramming was a bonding experience.
It was. It was. I think we were in San Diego together for about 4 days. It was a Thursday afternoon through Monday morning. And I calculated that we spent about 50 hours in meeting and discussing comics. And we all were taking loads of stuff back to our rooms at night. I slept less than 20 hours over the course of those 4 nights.
Wow.
Just enough to make sure I was coherent.
Before we get too far into what happened and what went on in that weekend experience, when you were done, what was the first thing you read when you got done?
The first thing I read was not a comic. I needed just a little bit of a break, but the second thing I read was a comic. So the first thing I read was the book called Stoner, sort of a 1960s novel about academia. It was very lovely. But then the one of the early things I read after that was the new Sonny Liu book, the art of Charlie Chan Chok. Hi, I'm going to get that wrong.
Hak Chai. Yeah.
Thank you, Hak Chai. So I'm back on comics now, but I had to take a break for prose.
That sounds more like a reading an Eisner potential nominated book as well. So.
It was, but that's one that someone else will have to worry about.
That's for next year.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, in doing all of your reading, and there was a lot of it, did you discover, I guess, what stands out among titles or creators that you didn't know about before you started to prepare for this?
I think one of the surprises for me was an anthology that was something I hadn't come across before actually I got to San Diego even. And that was and I'm looking for the title so I don't screw it up, the 24/7 that was edited by Dan Barry. And it was a collection from the Lakes Comics Festival in England. Mm-hmm. And that was an anthology that there really was very little reason for it to have crossed my path at the time. But I was just really taken by it, and I think the other judges were. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on the list. I think these were just solid stories. They were all created within that 24-hour period, but the artist, the stories, the concepts, the execution were just really impressive. And that's something that I'm glad to have stumbled across in the judging scenario. And at the same time, one of the other publishers that I had only a passing awareness of before going to the judging weekend is the Highwater Press, which is a Canadian publisher that does a lot of First Nations and Indigenous comics. And we nominated one of their stories, A Blanket of Butterflies, but they have a whole series of work out. And I'm really excited now to, they've gone on my list as a publisher to pay attention to. Especially in terms of diversity in storytelling. The judges, I think as a whole, were just really, again, excited about what we were seeing from that publisher. So that's a couple of examples, and but I was also looking. I have to say that Tilly Walden is someone who stood out this year, and I think I would have found her on my own because she ended up on so many best of the year list. But I definitely was cued in to look at her stuff because I knew I was going to be part of the judging panel, and I'm really happy to have stumbled across her work too.
And this is a little bit of bragging on our podcast part, but we were the very first people, the podcast at least, to interview Tilly Walden.
And I'm glad that you did. I mean, I think I just saw she's signed a deal with First Second.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, she's young and has lots of places to go.
Yeah, although I have to say the one that was nominated, I love this part.
Mm-hmm.
That's one that I didn't read, but it was her first book, this one, Summer, that I found very striking. And,
yeah,
and that was the one that I'd interviewed her about. So I'll definitely have to check out. I read her most recent one as well, but this one, I love this part. I'm not familiar with.
I think what she does with this book, I love this part, sort of this juxtaposition of a very personal story and a landscape, just a very architectural landscape-driven background, and the way the personal story and then that background play off of each other is very cool. And I think the story is spot on for sort of a coming of age sort of romance story. So,
well, that sounds. I was gonna say,
and the other Tilly Walden stuff I've read too. I'm just, again, I think she's definitely someone who is going places.
Is it I love this part, similar the way you described it to her new one, A City Inside?
I haven't seen that one, but it's very different for me than The End of Summer.
Yeah. The way you described, I love this part, being in large part kind of more of a self-reflection, almost autobiographical to some degree. That's very much what A City Inside is about.
Okay. I don't know how much I love this part is autobiographical, but it has that very personal feel. It's, two girls sort of figuring out what it means to be in love with one another. Mm-hmm. So
one of the areas that I'm always interested in looking to see what comes out of the Eisner nominations are the comic related book category, and since the academic scholarly work has been added to the nominees as well. What went into kind of making those selections, since those are things that you can't really probably digest in a 4-day weekend. So how did the group go about discussing those works?
Sure. So one of the things that happens with the judging panel is that each of the judges takes responsibility for particular categories in advance. And we do, maybe not, winnowing isn't quite the right word, but we do some initial vetting of the materials that are nominated or might be considered for a particular category. And I was the person on the judging panel who did that for the best comics related book and the best academic and scholarly work. And so it was really my role to be the one who did all of that reading before we showed up for the weekend. And so that meant I was paying attention to and reading in detail, a lot of stuff. I spent a lot of time going through the sort of academic output, for instance, from 2015, and thinking about the comics-related books that were coming out. And then I made some shorter lists of things that I thought people needed to spend some time reviewing. And so over the course of that judging weekend, people paid particular attention and read and skimmed from those selections. So I think that, those got a fair shake. I think with especially with the comics related books, that there were people there who had already read or spent a lot of time looking at things like the Harvey Kurtzman book or the Will Eisner book or the King of the Comics book. So our conversations around all of that stuff were robust and thoughtful. But I was the one who sort of helped make that initial call or initial set of recommendations.
Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to the jury deciding what books, what creators will be nominated within each category, how much power does the jury have to change or maybe redefine or perhaps even introduce or break away new categories from what had come before?
The jury has quite a bit of flexibility. So one of the things that happened this year, it was a small change, but we adjusted the age category or the ages for a couple of the kids categories to better reflect what we see happening in terms of kids publishing and what might be a better developmentally based breakdown. So there was that small change. I think that the other changes that you've seen in categories over the years, the renaming or the expansion of categories or the deletion of categories, that has all been driven by judges. I think that in future years, there's going to be a need to do some more work. I mean, there are already a lot of categories for 6 humans to try to grapple with. But I think that in future years, you're going to begin to see some more expansion of categories or redefinition of categories, especially when you get into things like the single issue one-shot categories or the web comics and digital comics categories or the comics related journalism categories. I mean, our media landscape is changing, the publishing landscape is changing, and awards are often, I think, a little bit behind the time. They tend to be more reactive.
Yeah.
And I think that it's going to take a couple more years for some of those categories to shift in ways that are more reflective maybe of the contemporary publishing landscape.
Mm. Now, you're mentioning some of the changes that you made to the publications for younger readers. And what specifically, how did you fine-tune?
It was just really shifting an age range by a year, so that the best publication for kids went from being 9 to 11 to 9 to 12. So we just expanded that, and that meant shrinking the best publication for teens from 12 to 17 to 13 to 17. And that's not a big change, but I think that for those of us who and to some extent, those publication ranges for kids stuff are pretty artificial anyway. They're more about marketing than they are about real readers. But I think that small age adjustment really allowed us to make some better choices for nominations in those categories.
So, again, sticking with the 3 categories for younger readers, when you guys had to decide what to consider for what category, I mean, sometimes there's a noted difference between a publication for an early reader and one for teens, right. But you mentioned that it's market-driven. Is this something that the publisher or the creator even may, by in large, define? Like if they say, we want our book to be considered for this particular category in this age range?
Absolutely. Publishers and creators can specify which categories they think a work should be considered for. Anytime you look at the back of a trade paperback, for instance, and see a grade or age recommendation, that's really a marketing sort of thing. And I often joke with my students that when you see something that says ages 8 through 12, that's just because typically a publisher doesn't know where else to put it. And that's an oversimplification, but it is these categories are to some extent artificial. At the same time, one of the judges this year, his day job is as a children's librarian, and he spends a big chunk of his time thinking about how to make those good matches in terms of books and readers. And I teach people who are going to be children's librarians, so I try to think thoughtfully and critically about those issues. So we may have, I'm not sure at this point, but we may have nominated some items in categories that look a little bit different than what the publishers or creators might have suggested for them. We nominated where we thought the best fit was.
Oh, okay.
So that I think what you're describing there really helps a lot, because you've got multiple factors playing into some of these categories, being what the publisher submits a work for versus what the committee decides where a work should go. And I think from the outside, there can be some questioning about, well, why is this book in this category and not another category, for example? And we can't really know, I guess, where that decision originated from.
Right. And I think it's important to understand that there could be a title that is submitted maybe for best new series, or best adaptation, or even best reality-based work, where the publisher is seeing it in this more general category, that the judges may see that, even though the publisher or the creator hasn't considered this as a children's publication, maybe it really does fit there, as well as perhaps fitting somewhere else in the nomination or on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel, Carol, your time as one of the judges, that with a particular category there was maybe an embarrassment, too much of an embarrassment of riches? In other words, so much to consider that it became almost overwhelming, or maybe on the other side, a category that you wish that there had been more that you guys knew about, but there just wasn't as much as maybe with some of the other categories?
I think most of the categories had an embarrassment of riches, to be quite honest. I think certainly the children's categories, those were some of the hardest, and that reflects just the extraordinary investment, I think, that publishers, both comics publishers and more conventional children's publishers, have made in comics over the past decade. I think that with a category like Best Digital and Webcomic, I think there were some amazing comics that, I can't tell you what they were, but, didn't make it to that final cut. And the same with, categories like Best Reality-Based Material or Best Limited Series. I mean, there really was there's so much good stuff to choose from. And you'll notice that there are some categories where there are 6 nominations rather than maybe the more conventional 5.
Right.
And I think that is there, and that's a consequence of some of the immense array of great stuff that's being published. We weren't able to get it down to 5, and there are some that we had these ties as we were voting on the nominees, and it took us a long time to get from maybe even 10 items down to 6, because there were so many things that we've had strong feelings about.
You mentioned Best Digital Webcomic category, and in fact, that's what I was thinking about when I asked you that question. Mm-hmm. I was talking with someone just this weekend about how, I do feel almost overwhelmed at times with the amount of print comics that are out there. I mean, it's only a small fraction that we can actually get to, or that I can actually get to. But when it comes to webcomics, I would think that becomes even more of an issue because there's just so much out there. Because it is a truly democratic platform, anybody can do that. And so I would think that the digital and especially webcomic part of that would just be so overwhelming. I mean, where do you stop and how do you find out about this stuff? There's so many places. I mean, with print publications, you do have publishers and creators who will send you things.
Right.
But there could be an incredible, really kick-ass webcomic out there that no one has discovered, or at least discovered to the point that it catches the attention of someone with the Eisners.
Yeah, I think that's a real problem. And I mean, I think, again, that this category is so broad because it's considering both digital comics and web comics, you know, and those are sort of platform differences more than anything. But,
right.
You know, I think for us as the judges, there are some of us who are more avid web comics readers than others. And so I think that to some extent we were relying on both nominees that were coming in, or nominations that were coming in, as well as the few review sources that do care about webcomics. And I think we were, trying to think big, but I'm sure that in a category like that, we were somewhat limited, maybe in how much we could really give good consideration, maybe, to the vastness of what there is. So if there were a category that maybe we were most hamstrung by, just in terms of how much, it was probably that digital webcomic category.
Wow.
I have to say with that category too, and I don't want to get too deep into kind of picking out individual nominees, but I think it just happened to be for me that list came out just after, I think, Stu Campbell, who did These Memories Won't Last, had actually reached out to us and sent us a link to his comic. And, you know, whether or not Derek often prefaces emails to me like, I'm sure you don't read our email, but, but that one happened to be at one point when I was actually looking at our email, saw that, and I said, well, let me check this out. And I was just blown away by that when I first looked at it. It was a really amazing work. But that's not one I had seen anywhere else. I had seen kind of referenced anywhere else. And if Stu hadn't reached out to us, I probably wouldn't have even known it existed, other than once the Eisner nominations came out. So that one I was really happy to see.
Yeah, I think that sort of with the webcomics, digital comics thing, I think you'll notice, for instance, that under the best short story, for instance, one of the oatmeal stories is there. So there's beginning to be a little bit of a bleed over, but the digital and webcomic, I think, is still, you don't see in this list, for instance, a lot of the more continuing sort of humor-based webcomics that I think a lot of people think of when they think of webcomics. You're seeing more, I think, artsy, thoughtful, not that humor can't be artsy or thoughtful, but maybe a little bit more of the serious side of webcomics with some of what got nominated.
So, without giving anything away, were there any moments in the deliberation where there was, how shall I put it, less harmony than otherwise, where you guys just intensely disagreed?
Yes. And I think that this probably happens with every Eisner jury, that I think each of us judges had something that we really, really loved that no one else did, or something that we really hated that, maybe we were alone in feeling so strongly negative about it. And so that seeped into discussions at times. But I think that we all were really there to put aside our personal biases and really try to find a way of honoring what we sincerely believe are some of the best comics and creators of the year. And it's really hard because we all are comics readers. We're all coming from this different place of interest. And I do think that we really did do a good job of putting aside, the fact that, maybe we really love the Darth Vader comics, or we really love a particular webcomic, or we think some, particular indie publisher is awesome. I think we were able to put those sorts of personal biases aside and just really come together to find consensus for what we thought was deserving of recognition. Now, does that mean that all of us is 100% happy with the ballot? Probably not. There's still some things maybe I wish were or weren't on the ballot. But, I think that any time you get people trying to come up with these lists and make the decisions that we were trying to make as judges, you're apt to have some outliers.
And when you guys cast your votes, you don't do just a yes or no. It's more on a scale. Is what, from 1 to 5?
Yeah, it's 1 to 5, and there is often several rounds of voting for each category. And we do the categories are decided not all at once, so we make some initial calls, we do some voting. People, we try to get down the potential list of nominees into a more manageable amount, because when we begin to winnow down what is under consideration for a particular category, everyone on the judging team is obliged to spend time looking at that stuff and reading it and thinking about it. It takes some rounds of voting. It allows us to be a little bit more nuanced, and the 1 to 5 rating system allows us to be a little bit more nuanced in casting our votes. It does result in some ties, which means that, we then go back and spend more time with the titles that have been tied, and then we'll do some more voting. So it's not easy or quick, but I think it is a good way of, again, helping some titles and creators that are clearly strong, clearly valued, rise to the top.
One of the things I noticed and appreciated on the Comic-Con website is soon after the nominees were announced, they had brief paragraphs by each of the 6 judges for this year's nomination process. Mm-hmm. And you say at one point that some may feel that the list may be a little bit on the activist side. And I'm wondering if you, since then, have heard from others or have read in the media reactions that do think as much, that there was something more activist in what you guys were doing.
I haven't really encountered as many criticisms of our list of nominees as I was anticipating. I think that we all were prepared maybe for the backseat driving critiques of our work. I mean, I think, again, that's anytime you review something or nominate something or award something, you open yourself up to critique.
Yeah.
You guys know that.
Oh, yeah.
And, I followed the Twitter conversation and the Facebook conversation and what was being said in the popular press about the awards. And as a whole, I think the conversation was really supportive and enthusiastic about the sort of the idea that we were beginning to recognize, and I still don't think we're there in fully recognizing the value of women creators, of creators of color, of the impact of diverse voices on and in U.S. comics. But I think that our nominations are beginning to get there. Mm-hmm. And I know that there are some folks who are longtime DC, Marvel, Vertigo readers who might look at the list and they say, well, these aren't the comics that we're reading. And that may be true. And I think you'll see, a few of those titles there, but I really think that the comics industry as a whole, even though DC and Marvel may still be driving sales, I think there is a richness in storytelling and a richness in the industry that goes well beyond those two publishers. And I think you see that again reflected in the nominees. I know deep in my heart that there are some people who aren't that excited about it. I've just, the one Twitter comment I saw that, was like a small dagger to my heart was someone who wrote to say this, I'm going to have to use the write-in nominations more for this year's Eisners than I've ever had to before, which to me, is a mark that, well, this is someone who probably reads mostly DC and Marvel and clearly isn't happy with our choices.
Well, I know that these are titles that, by and large, Andy and I are familiar with. Many of them are titles that we've discussed on the show. So you definitely have a receptive audience in us. Mm-hmm.
Well, cool. So I know that before we turn the record button on earlier, I asked you for a preview of your thoughts. So is there anything you thought, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Is there anything you thought we got horribly wrong?
You may have to listen now. Can we do this to your face?
That's
what the second half of this episode's all about.
Honestly,
you're going to spend the next half, I realize, telling what we got wrong, but
no, honestly, when I always look at these kinds of lists with pretty open mind, and I'm more kind of fascinated by the stuff that we've just been talking about. What goes into that decision making process? Because I understand that every one of these, every top 10 list, every slate of nominees for awards is subjective, and none of them are going to be 100%. But there's enough things that I feel like looking at this list that were not only things that I really loved, but things that I'm really glad to see getting greater attention. And I spent a lot of time already talking about These Memories Won't Last, but there's several other things on there too that that even if I look at something and say, I wouldn't have nominated that, it doesn't say to me that I'm not saying that to mean that would be unworthy of nomination.
Right.
Yeah. I feel similar in that, I look at this and I try to make a distinction. Whether I adhere to this in my conversation is another matter, but I try to make this distinction between taste and critical inquiry. Right.
Right.
I go through the list and, I hope that this person gets it or this person deserves it or how the hell did that title get considered? And that's the taste part, and I'm aware of that. But I'm much more concerned with some of the things like Andy pointed out, the process, the procedure that goes into all of this, and also some of the questions that I have. And I feel good about this list. When I saw the nominations, there's nothing here that I thought disruptive. in any way, and not just to me, but I'd be surprised if it were disruptive to other readers, outside of maybe the diehard superhero readers who may not find much. But then again, that happens every year, right, with the Eisners?
Yeah.
But I mean, some of the questions that I had are many of the ones that you raised. So, for instance, one of my main issues is with the best digital / webcomic category. And you're right. I mean, this needs to grow up. And people need to get a little more hip to the technology. I think by conflating digital comic and webcomic, they do a disservice, I think, to both formats, but specifically to webcomics. And that's unfortunate. So, but other than those kind of issues that you've already discussed, no, I think there's a lot here to like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was going into the beginning the reading process, and I've reflected a little bit on this in some questions I responded to for my university. It's the idea that there's stuff that is not my taste. I'm not a big horror comics reader in my everyday life. I don't read a lot of webcomics in my everyday life. I don't read a lot of superhero, not a lot of contemporary superhero comics in my everyday life. But I went into this judging with an open mind, trying to remind myself every time I sat down with a book that I need to pay attention to the story, to the art, to how all of this works together. I need to recognize that I may not be the intended reader for this particular comic, but I need to still be able to look at this and think about it in a way that honors how and why it came to be. That can be really hard to get outside of your usual preferences and biases and habits. But I think, again, for all of us who were on the judging team, we really worked hard at doing that. And we tried to find a reason to include something as often as we could, rather than trying to find a reason to discard it or to not consider it for a particular category.
From what you said there, it also segues into a kind of bigger question I had, which is if you had to sit down with someone who's going to be a judge in future years, what advice would you give them going into it?
Wow. Mostly just read everything. Read everything, and when you think you've read everything, read some more. Because you probably haven't done it. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I really think just, trying to put aside who you are as a reader and trying to look to see, is this something that is robust and rich? Is this really doing something cool with comics? Is the art or the storytelling or the way they work together exceptional? And go from there. But be open and know that you're going to have a lot of hard work and a small amount of heartbreak ahead of you.
Well, maybe that's advice that at a future time Andy or I can take to heart.
I hope so, guys. If you're ever asked to serve as a judge, just say yes. Don't think about it. Just say yes.
Well, Carol, thank you very much for coming on the show and talking to us about your experiences as a judge.
Hey, thank you, Derek.
Thanks.
Wow. I started to combine Derek and Royal, and that was going to do something interesting there. But thank you, Derek. This has been fun, and thank you, Andy, as well.
Sure.
Well, that was great. Thanks again, Carol, for coming on the show and letting us know a lot of stuff that we didn't know about the Eisner Awards.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. I had gotten to see Carol at the ICAF conference a few weeks ago, or about a month ago, I guess now, and she was just coming off her weekend at the nominations, and we were a couple days away from when the nominations came out, and I was kind of chomping at the bit to find out what was happening, but she kept her mouth shut.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
But I think that's also the genesis of this episode, because
Right.
you had let me know that you had seen her and she would be interested in talking on the podcast. So,
Yeah.
So there you go. So I found it really interesting that Carol kind of turned the tables toward the end of that conversation and asked us our thoughts. And, of course, we plan on sharing our thoughts on this episode, but I didn't expect her to ask that. But so in my reply, and I think it's similar to yours, which is, fairly positive and upbeat, I really don't feel that I was sugarcoating things while she was on the line, because I really do feel that way. I think that this is a strong list of nominees this year. And there are certain things on here that, in terms of taste, it may not be my cup of tea, but that's another story. But there's definitely a lot to talk about in this year's list.
Yeah, there definitely is. And again, as I said to Carol, there may be things that I wouldn't have nominated or that I don't read, but I think she made a good point that as a judge, she went into this with certain things that she didn't know about herself. And so had to kind of keep an open mind to things that she didn't read as well.
Right. Well, I'm not sure where to begin with this year's nominees. Maybe let's start here. Is there one category that you feel most excited about?
I'm not sure if I would pick one category that I feel most excited about, but in our interview, I kind of milked this, so I'm not gonna belabor this too much. But the nomination of Stu Campbell's "These Memories Won't Last" in the webcomics category was one that stood out to me, and as one that I was really happy with. And I think there's some other things as well, as far as I think Squirrel Girl getting some love in a couple different categories. I was happy with that as well.
Yeah. Actually, I don't think you're belaboring Campbell's "These Memories Won't Last," because I wanted to say more about that when we were talking to Carol. And what I wanted to point out is, curiously enough, Sean and I did discuss "These Memories Won't Last" in our April webcomics episode, and the Eisner nominees for this year came out the day after that show went up.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so it was another example of good timing on our part.
Yeah, and I don't want to reveal too much here, but I got in touch with Stu Campbell about it after reading that about the autobiographical comics project I'm working on, and we had some exchanges about his work in relationship to that.
Well, good.
Yep.
Well, I wasn't thinking of this category in that question that I was asking you, which one really stands out to you that you're most excited about. But let's stick with the digital webcomic category for a moment. And I don't want to repeat what I said to Carol, although I do feel that they need to update this. I think it's unfortunate that they combine two different platforms, digital comics and then webcomics, two different, very, very different things. One of the things, though, and I think this is revealed in the listings here. Now, I'm not familiar with everything here. I'm familiar with Bandette, Fresh Romance, and then These Memories Won't Last. Not The Legend of Wonder Woman or Lighten Up. But the one comic that stands out among these five, and not just because it's a great comic, is These Memories Won't Last. What I mean by that is it's the only one that strikes me as both truly a webcomic and it's more DIY than anything. I mean, even with Lighten Up, which is part of the nib, I mean, the nib, it's like the oatmeal. I mean, that gets a lot of attention, right? There are a lot of people who work on that. And maybe I just have a love for the little guy and gal, but I always find it exciting when someone on their own gets attention like this. And, I do like Bandette. It's a part of Monkey Brain, though, and that's kind of a bigger, outlet. Same thing with the Nib and then, of course, DC Digital. But I think that Campbell's These Memories Won't Last really stands out. And it stands out not necessarily that it's better than the others, but I think it's something very different. And that gets back to the webcomic digital distinction.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point you make. Now, you of that list you mentioned, you weren't familiar with like Lighten Up by Ron Wimberly, and I think when you divided that list into the top three are really are basically kind of comicsology type digital comics,
right?
Whereas Lighten Up and These Memories Won't Last are definitely web comics,
right,
and utilize the advantages of
technology, and
the advantages of the medium to different degrees. And so I mean, Legend of Wonder Woman, for example, is also is one of the DC comics that is digital first but then print, and it isn't a significant difference between the digital and the print version,
right?
And the reading experience is pretty similar too. Now some people will quibble that the medium in which you read it on is significant and does change the meaning, but I'm saying this as a matter of degree.
Right.
Lighten Up and These Memories Won't Last won't translate into print very well.
Yeah, exactly. And I like Lighten Up. Don't get me wrong. It's just I think the reason why I tend to privilege These Memories Won't Last is Lighten Up is part of the nib, and that gets a lot of recognition already.
Right. So. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah. I think that. I think, but as far as divide you marked at the beginning of that comment a really kind of what I think is an accurate comment there on a clear division between, say, the first three nominees there and the last two nominees.
Right. The category that I'm most excited about, and I'll define what I mean by most excited, in that I have the toughest time deciding which one I hope wins, has to be the best U.S. edition of International Material Asia.
Okay.
Because there are a number of titles there, some of which we have discussed on the Comics Alternative Manga Show, or at least by creators who have titles in nomination here. I think in particular, Assassination Classroom, Master Keaton, Showa, and Sunny. I mean, those are the ones that really stand out to me. I'm not familiar with A Silent Voice or A Bride Story, but if I had to decide among those three that I know, Assassination Classroom, Master Keaton, and then Sunny, or Showa, so I guess four, I wouldn't know where. Okay. But I'm just glad that all of them are nominated.
Now, actually, something you said there, maybe I don't want to get off of that category, but something you said there raised a question for me. Do you vote in the Eisner Awards?
Yes.
Okay. So do I.
Okay.
So, okay, I just wanted to make sure that when you say, I say something about what I hope wins that's different from, saying, this is what I voted for, which I'm probably not going to say.
Yeah, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I cannot remember what I voted for in some of these categories.
Really?
Yeah, for the reason that's similar to what I just told you about the International Material Asia. There's so many titles that I enjoy in that particular category. Where did I come down? I can't remember. But I know whatever I chose, I'd feel good about. Because it was one of those four in the manga.
Yeah. Yeah, I printed out my list. I have it right here, but
Yeah, that was smart. I didn't do that.
because I have the same problem too. Whereas, I can't. Once the awards are announced, I won't remember who I voted for either. So, yeah. So, since you've been doing that manga show, it's obviously been exposing you to stuff that you wouldn't have gotten to read before otherwise, right? And I'm still behind on that. I still don't follow a lot of manga, so there's only a couple things on here that I'm even remotely familiar with.
Yeah. And, I think that the past year and a half that we've been doing the webcomic show has also really exposed me to a lot of different things. And this is, again, kind of coming back to this category that we keep referencing. There was something that Carol said during our conversation that I thought was interesting, because she mentioned, and I can't remember her exact words, but something about the various the MIDI humor titles that are out there that are webcomics. And there are a lot of webcomics that are humor based that may be kind of a gag per installment, right? Something maybe more akin to a newspaper strip. And there are tons of those out there. But, on the other hand, there is just a slew of very serious, weighty webcomics that definitely aren't digital comics, but are webcomics that, it's not as if I'm doubting that the jurors this year, and even in past years, aren't aware of this stuff. I just think that the volume is so massive that it's impossible to know as much as you need to. So, I mean, I do think that the proliferation of webcomics makes it nearly impossible to be even, slightly even-handed, because you just don't know of everything out there. But that's just a reality we have to contend with, given the technology.
Right. Yeah. Right. And now I'm realizing, and looking at some of these, that there was a question I had for Carol that I forgot to ask, which is, what's up with all the love for Funky Winkerbean? because Funky Winkerbean got nominated not only in the Best Archival Collection strips, but also in the Best graphic album reprint, Roses in December, A Story of Love and Alzheimer's. Or maybe that might be a Crankshaft book. I can't remember. But anyway, Tom Badiak is getting some attention there, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I think Funky Winkerbean is an incredible, bizarre strip that can be one of the more depressing things that exists in the world. But I'm glad that it's all getting reprinted.
Well, maybe when Carol hears this show, she'll answer your question by emailing us.
Yeah, but when I look at those kind of reprint and archival collection categories, those are the areas where I really found it. Even if everything isn't in there, isn't something I would have considered, the big ones that I felt like that were no brainers are in there. The Eternaut got a lot of attention, not just in that category, but in others as well. That's one of the best books that came out in 2015, hands down.
Oh yeah. Well, my feelings about that from our year-end show.
Right. And that Sunday Press book, The White Boy in Skull Valley, is, one of the more amazing strip reprint books that has been done in the last few years. So I'm really glad to see both of those things.
Yeah, and like you, I don't want to go over, from what I can remember, what I voted for, but I will say that anytime The Eternaut was nominated, I was there. So it got my vote. I just love that book. So yeah, I'm glad that got a lot of attention this year. I was less familiar with the first two categories, or at least the first two that they list on the website, Best Short Story and Best Single Issue One Shot. Some of these I'm familiar with, but others I'm not. when Carol was talking about Tilly Walden, I've read a number of Tilly Walden comics, but I don't know. I love this part. I'm not familiar with A Blanket of Butterflies, and I didn't read that issue number 11 of Silver Surfer. So the only ones in that category that I'm familiar with is Ethan Riley's Pope Hats number 4, and then Mowgli's Mirror by Schwarben. I love Schwarben's work. And of course, I love Ethan Riley. But they're the only two I know in that category, so I feel a little unprepared, I guess, for that. And similar to the best short story category.
I feel like I remember when we did that Retrofit Big Planet show that you mentioned that you had hoped that Mowgli's Mirror would get some recognition later on, because I know that was one of the books out of that batch that we read that you really loved.
Yeah. Wow, I said that on that show.
I don't know. We can go back and check, but I'm pretty sure you said something to that effect.
So, okay, there's another example of the comics alternative bump.
Yeah. I was trying to count how many people that just alone have been on the comics alternative that got nominated. It's actually quite a bit. I lost track, but and I probably don't know everybody that's been interviewed since I don't listen to the show unless I'm on it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we have talked to a lot of the people who were nominated this year. And on that topic, one of the things that impressed me about the 3 young reader categories, best publication for early readers, for kids, and for teens, is, and here's a hats off to Andy Wolverton and Gwen Tarbox. A lot of these titles they have discussed on the Young Readers show. And I was just amazed when I saw this list. Okay, so for early readers, they discussed Little Robot. In the category for kids, which is ages 9 to 12 now, they discussed Baba Yaga's Assistant. I don't think they discussed this Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales book, but they've discussed those in the past. Roller Girl and Sunny Side Up. And then under the teens category, they did discuss Awkward, Oyster War, and then we have alluded to Super Mutant Magic Academy, and I know we discussed Moose as well on a show. So I mean, yeah, Gwen and Andy are really hitting it.
And we talked about March book too.
And we talked about
you
March.
You and I did, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad that March, is nominated for something other than the teen category.
Yeah. When we talked about the comics alternative bump, I also feel like there is now I can sell the Sumter Comic Art Symposium that I help organize as a pathway to an Eisner nomination. Since of the creators that we had there this year, both Kyle Starks for Sex Castle and Erica Henderson for Squirrel Girl got nominated.
Yeah.
And then Roy Thomas got nominated for Alter Ego. So I think close to 50% of our guests got Eisner nominations this year. I don't think any other show can claim that.
Right, and we challenge any other show. Well, on the category you mentioned, Starks's Sex Castle. In the humor category, there were 2 that really stood out there for me, and one was Kyle's Sex Castle, and we talked to him on the podcast about a year and a half ago, I guess, but one that I have a particular fondness for is Eric Haven's Have you read that?
No.
Okay. Wolverton and I discussed that when we did the Ad House Spotlight about a year ago. And, oh, wow, is just a collection of strange, offbeat, absurd stories. And I think it's the weirdness that has me mesmerized with that book. So, I love Kyle's humor in Sex Castle, but there's just something strangely offbeat about And Eric Haven was, I guess, a producer, maybe a writer, I'm not sure, on Mythbusters.
Okay.
So, yeah, he comes with an interesting resume.
Yeah. So what you're pointing there to me, and with a couple of these other things, is the my need to use this list to seek out some things that I haven't read yet.
Mm-hmm. There are a couple of I guess choices in sticking with the humor that seem to be, I don't want to call them safe, but maybe predictable or understandable for me. Like, for instance, Cyanide and Happiness, Deep Dark Fears. I mean, it strikes me that that's the kind of book that's going to appeal to a lot of different people. And I mean, I like Kate Beaton's Hark a Vagrant comics. But again, there's something about her style, as much as I love it, that strikes me as, yes, of course, it's going to appeal to the kind of readers who, would end up liking something on lists like that. I don't know if that's being unfair or not, but I mean, I do like it. It's just, it makes sense to me that that's on there. And I guess what makes less sense to me, and what I appreciate, is both Kyle Stark's and Eric Haven's place in that category.
Yeah. I would put the inclusion of something like Kate Beaton's Hark a Vagrant as more in line with something like the Eternaut, where it is a book that kind of one would expect to see
right. It's
on this list.
Yeah.
But with Hark a Vagrant even more so, because it's Kate Beaton's work on that series and in general is well liked enough that we can imagine that she's probably going to get future nominations for anything she puts out.
Right.
Now one creator that I thought really benefited from our comics alternative bump was Brian K. Vaughan with Paper Girls. I really don't think that would have gotten nominated. I don't think he would have gotten any attention at all if he hadn't been on our show.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. Actually, you remind me of a question that I had forgotten to ask Carol. I don't know if it was going to be more of a question as much of maybe a snide comment. Mm-hmm. That, this is the first time in about 4 years that Saga, this hasn't been the Saga show.
Yeah.
And Saga is nowhere to be found on this year's list of nominees, mm-hmm. but we do have Brian K. Vaughan with Paper Girls. So
yeah.
And I'm wondering if in the conversation that the 6 judges were having, if someone said, well, what about Saga? Because that continues to be a good series, and it is, I think, mm-hmm. then if there were others that thought, that got a lot of love the previous year, so let's lay low on Saga.
Yeah, it could be to give Paper Girls another chance, and Cliff Chang,
or just other creators, period, a chance.
Right, but Cliff Chang's doing a great job on that series as well, and so seeing him nominated for best penciler and inker,
right,
I think was something that made me happy too. In fact, that was one of the categories. Best penciler and inker team is one that was has some really top-notch talent in it. That makes for a difficult decision.
Yeah. Going back to the best new series, because Paper Girls is nominated there.
Yeah.
The only one that I'm not familiar with is Kaiju Max. And I know about it, but I haven't read it. And the others, though, I have. One question that I have in this category is, now Carol was saying, or I guess I was reading, I don't know if she said this in our discussion, that these were titles that came out in 2015, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering about their criteria for new series, because Bitch Planet began in 2014, didn't it?
I don't know. I have my first issue around here somewhere. I can look it up, but I'm not sure. It has only had 7 or 8 issues.
Yeah.
So there's that. But Yeah.
Yes, indeed. In fact, we reviewed Bitch Planet #1 in December of 2014.
Well, that's
maybe it's like the tail end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Close enough to 2015.
Yeah. And I've read at least some of all of those series. Like I said, with Monstrous, I've only read the first issue, but I'm looking forward to that trade when that comes out because I've heard such great things about it. And I think Kaiju Max is a good series that has a great concept behind it. The idea that there's this supermax prison for kaiju or giant monsters,
right?
And playing out a lot of the kind of tropes or conventions of prison narratives with Godzillas and Mothras and so on is a fun idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I respect that being there.
Yeah, and I'm with you on Monstrous. I think that the story is great and the art is beautiful. And I don't know, there's a part of me that would really be surprised if this doesn't get some attention. Is that the only thing? I can't recall. Is that the only thing that either Marjorie Liu or Sana Takeda are nominated for? Is it just the Best New Series?
No, Marjorie Liu is nominated for Best Writer.
Okay, so yeah, I would hope that she would get at least something, one of those two. Mm-hmm. Because that's really good. The limited series, again, there are titles there. I don't know which, I think I know which one I voted for, but I could go for almost any of these.
See, that was the one that I had the more difficult time with, kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Whereas I think with the new series, it was tough to pick because I liked pretty much all those series. But with the limited series, there's really only one of those that I really stuck with beyond the first issue.
Which one was that?
That's the Fade Out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one that, I can tell you, I do remember my vote there. That because it was nominated last year for, was it Best New Series or Best Limited? It was nominated for something and it didn't get.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it may have been Best New Series because at the time I don't know if we knew that it was going to be a limited series, or at least as limited as it turned out to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the Best Continuing Series, I felt a little bit at a loss. The only ones that I knew or that I was familiar with, having read, Bandette and Southern Bastards. I still have not read one issue of Invincible yet. I didn't read Giant Days. I thought about it, but I just never got around to it. And then Silver Surfer, I just, usually don't get to Marvel Comics until way after the fact, like after they've been out for a year or so.
Yeah, Silver Surfer is the one series out of those that I'm reading regularly. I wouldn't necessarily have picked that as my favorite series, but the Giant Days is a series I really am wanting to read because now I've heard so many good things about it.
Yeah.
And Bandette, I guess I was following, though I hadn't seen a new issue of that in a while. And, as Carol talked about, I guess off the show, the fact that Southern Bastards was getting a lot of attention at ICAF from other scholars. Also, as I talked to some of those people about it, said, you're making me rethink my decision to stop reading this book.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that as well, and I may have even mentioned this to you on the show before, is, I was really hot and heavy for Southern Bastards when it first came out, and then after that first narrative arc, I think I cooled on it, and maybe part of the cooling was due to the fact that so many people were liking it for reasons that, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure why. I think there was also something about that reveling in the southernness that comes out in that series that after a while kind of got on my nerves.
Yep.
Because I'm from the South. And, I'm from Charlotte, just as I think Jason Latour is. And yeah, there's a lot to like about the South, but at the same time, I definitely do not romanticize it. And I'm not saying necessarily that they do. I'm just wondering if maybe that is what happens to come out of the experience of reading Southern Bastards.
That was one of the most common topics of discussion when people were talking about Southern Bastards at the conference was, even though we're into this series for almost a year now, how much is it really kind of living up to a promise of challenging some of those Southern, not just Southern stereotypes, but Southern culture, some of the kind of darker sides of Southern culture, and how much is it just kind of reveling in it?
Yeah. So, and I think that I started to have my first worries or concerns when I read, maybe in the letter section of somewhere in the first arc, that they had considered at one point including Southern recipes in each issue.
Oh, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. The idea of recipes in the back of a comic I'm okay with, but within the context of problematizing Southern culture and Southern stereotypes and Southern history, I don't know. That may be a little problematic.
Huh. See, that's the one thing about living in the South that I get behind the most.
The culinary, huh? The culinary part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm with you there. I love the food. Don't get me wrong. One thing that I really need to seek out now, because Carol talks so highly about it, and I'm not familiar with this, is Fanfare presents their 24/7. Because that was nominated for Best Anthology, and they also had that story hand-me-down in the Best Short Story category.
Yeah, I agree. That's something I'm curious to find as well.
Yeah. And I remember when the Nibs Eat More Comics was on Kickstarter, and I think I had considered backing that. I ultimately decided not to. That kind of makes sense, I guess, that something like that is on the category. It also makes sense in a variety of different ways that the Drawn In Quarterly 25 Years of Contemporary Cartooning Comics and Graphic Novels is there. To me, that is the behemoth of the five. Mm-hmm. And I'm not just talking about page count.
Yeah. Well, that's a book I love. So.
I know, yeah. And I like it as well. And, I know that
and you don't think it's a comic.
Okay, within the context of our year-end list, I didn't think that it was comic enough for me to include it. But I think for this category, it makes perfect sense.
I'm just poking at you.
Okay. Hey, Eternaut was nowhere on your list last year, so
because I hadn't read it.
Okay. There you go.
I didn't. That was a book I didn't get to. I was sadly behind the curve on that one.
Another difficult category in terms of weighing which one is the top here is best reality-based work. And that's one that, as Carol mentioned, had 6 instead of 5 nominees.
Right.
And this is a great list. Arab of the Future, Displacement, Hip Hop Family Tree, Book 3, Invisible Ink, March, Book 2, and then The Story of My Tits.
Yeah. I'm pulling for Jennifer Hayden in that.
I don't want to say who I voted for, but I will say that I had a hard time choosing between Invisible Ink and Story of My Tits.
Yeah, and see, I haven't. Invisible Ink is a book that I have not read yet.
Yeah, and another reason why I'm really excited about Invisible Ink, and it got at least a couple of nods this year, is that this is the first, if you want to call it, graphic novel that Griffith has ever put out.
Right.
So it was quite a departure from what he's been known for, from the early days of, underground comics to more contemporary Zippy.
Sure.
In the strip format. So, but yeah, I think Story of My Tits is one of the big 2 contenders, really. But everything in that category is rich. Mm-hmm. What about the best graphic album new category?
Okay, well let me get to that. Let's see. There's There's another one. I hadn't read everything on there, but and we had Peter Cooper on the show for Ruins, and that was a book I really liked a lot. But that's one of the categories where I think there's more for me to check out, than for me to have had any strong feelings about anything on that.
Yeah. The two that I haven't read yet, The Long Walk to Valhalla and The Thrilling Adventures of Lovelace and Babbage, I have those, but I just haven't read them yet. But the other three we discussed on the podcast in one form or another. Wolverton and I discussed Nanjing, the Burning City. You and I interviewed Cooper when Ruins came out. And then Wolverton and I spoke with Dylan Horrocks right around the time of Sam Zabel and The Magic Pen.
Right.
So a lot of really good stuff. I'm less familiar with the titles in Best Graphic Album Reprint, although for me, this category seems to be a slam dunk. Because I've read, I think, I've read 3 of the 5, but there's one I think that should just be a slam dunk.
Okay. And that's your love for Johnny Ryan is
That's
coming
right.
out here.
Yeah. No, Soldier's Heart. I mean, I think, how can someone read that and come away without saying, okay, that's it. I don't want to read anything else. This has.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a, it's a classic, already.
Yeah.
So I think that definitely is one that, I like there a lot.
I do have to say, I'm a little surprised that Angry Youth Comics is nominated in that category. I mean, to me, it would probably make a little more sense to put it in Best Humor Publication. And one of the reasons why I mention this is over the past year, we have seen, and this is, I think, primarily through Fantagraphics, a lot of these classic 80s comics come back in nice collected editions. And Angry Youth Comics is one of those. I mean, that's a nice hardbound volume. I like Johnny Ryan. He is offensive, and I bristle when I read some of his stuff. But, it's like a guilty pleasure. So, I mean, that's a good volume. But to me, one of the things that struck me when I saw that Angry Youth Comics was nominated in the Best Graphic Album Reprint, one of the first things I thought was, where's 8-Ball?
Well, it's a good question.
Yeah, that was also a question that I had for Carol, but I thought I shouldn't ask it.
Okay. I didn't think of that.
Because it just strikes me that given both the creator and also the creation, 8-Ball itself, and what that has meant to comics, that was overlooked. I mean, I don't think it's nominated anywhere this year. Now, you can expect next year for Klaus definitely to be nominated, but it just strikes me that 8-Ball collection was a very important event, a publishing event in comics, but yet it's nowhere to be seen, while Johnny Ryan's Angry Youth Comics, the collection, is there. So,
well, what I'm going to be curious to see along those lines that will, I think, continue this conversation a little bit, will be not so much if Patience gets nominated, but if Fantagraphics Complete Women's Comics gets a nomination, because that is that to me is more in line with what's going on with that 8-Ball collection.
Yeah.
And will those massive, expensive slipcase editions be getting love, or is that just something that gets skipped over?
Yeah, and it would be a shame if that's the case. Now, you did get the Complete Women's Collection, didn't you?
Oh yeah. And I've been reading it today.
Wow. I bet I know why. I still want to get that. I just haven't ponied up yet.
Well, I was glad to have had the foresight to order it when Fantagraphics had their big sale for what was it, Cyber Monday sale, and so I picked that up with I ordered it in advance, basically for 40% off.
Oh wow, that's smart.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. So another category that I think there are two things worth noting there, and this is, for me at least, best adaptation from another medium. The first thing I want to point out is I wonder if this is the first time that two books with the word clown in it, or a version of the word clown, has been nominated in that category. You got City of Clowns and Ghetto Clown. But there's that. But I think more importantly for me is Fabio Moon and Gabriel Bá's Two Brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that book. And to me, that's, well, I say it's the standout for me in that category. But then again, that's the only one of the five that I've actually read. Despite my love of clowns.
Yeah, and your the fact that you're a hardcore John Leguizamo fan, I think, was something that surprised me that you weren't familiar with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, anybody associated with the Spawn movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, another category I'm not familiar with but one title in this that I've read, and that is Best U.S. Edition of International Material, not Asia, I guess. And that, you know, The Eternaut is the only one that I've read. I know about The Realist and the work of Asaf Hanukkah, but I haven't read The Realist. I've read parts of it, but I haven't read the entire thing. Are you familiar with any of these others outside of Eternaut?
No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think that in a lot of those other reprint categories and so on, that you know, there were also again some good choices made. You know, we see kind of two of the big, who I think of as the big names in reprints. Dean Mullaney under the strip reprints. Something he does seems to always get nominated every year.
Right.
And then our friend, you know, good friend of the show, Craig Yo, nominated for Walt Kelly's Fairy Tales, which is a great book.
Oh, it is. It is. And I'm glad that both Mullaney and Yo are nominated as they are. So that's always good to hear. And two people we've had on the show won multiple times.
Yeah.
You know, another thing, this is somewhat similar to my issues with the digital webcomic category, is the best comics-related periodical/journalism. And I'm glad that Carol addressed this, you know, without us even asking this. I think that is another category that I think is overdue for an overhaul. And in saying this, I'm thinking back to last year when we had Tom Spurgeon on the show, and he had even suggested that this shouldn't even be a category, that it should be stricken altogether. And there's a part of me that sees where he's coming from and says, well, yeah, I could see that. But I think that if journalism media coverage is retained, then it definitely should not be retained in the manner that it has been this year and previous years. And, you know, part of my gripe with this category, best comics related periodical journalism, is, you know, of course, self-serving. You know, where's the love for podcasts, right? But another thing is they seem to keep coming back to the same kind of publications over and over again. Now, last year, the International Journal of Comics Art was nominated in this category, correct?
I think so. I don't have last year's nominees pulled up, so I'm not sure.
So that, you know, as much as we like that journal, it is definitely not the only scholarly critical journal devoted to comic studies. So why do we keep seeing year after year the same kind of publishers like Tomorrow's? Now, I love Tomorrow's, don't get me wrong. It's just they have 1, 2, 3 categories nominated here. I mean, I'm really happy to see Tom's Hogan's Alley nominated. That's great. But I seem to see a lot of the same kind of publications nominated for this category every year. So why not include other journals, like, for instance, Image Text, or the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics, or Studies in Comics? And so I'm just wondering, are the judges, like, you know, outside of Carol, aware of these scholarly publications? I mean, this may be something akin to the burden of reading that she was addressing when it comes to the best academic scholarly work, right? That it takes a lot of effort to really go through those. So, I mean, I don't know. I just think that they need to revamp and update this category if they're going to retain it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think to their credit that even though Tomorrow's does kind of dominate that category, a lot of the usual suspects that we've seen in the past and seen win in the past, like Comic Book Resources, Comics Alliance,
right,
and so on, aren't there. And and when Tom was on the show, he said that he doesn't put his name in for nominations anymore, so we won't see the comics reporter in there probably either. But that it's more closer to people doing actual kind of historical research, in comics, with the exception of Michael Kavanagh's comic riffs. But the other 4 books are very serious comics history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, I think if they were going to break apart this category, of course, then the question becomes, if you break it into 2, then couldn't you make the argument of breaking it into 3 or more components? And then why retain it at all? If it's going to, I mean, how many categories, can the Eisners contain really? But if you're going to break it, maybe you should make a differentiation between print media and new media. But even new media, kind of lumping everything in to new media that could be considered new media may be doing a disservice, because what you see going on with blogs is very different from what you see going on with other kind of new or digital media. So, I mean, I don't have an easy answer for this. I just know that there's something very uncomfortable about this category.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be curious to see what if any changes get made in this in the future.
Yeah. Now, what are your thoughts, I guess going off of what Carol was telling us about the 2 categories, best comics-related book and best academic/scholarly work?
Let's see. The academic scholarly work category is one that I had actually a pretty significant amount of familiarity with.
Right.
Because I've read most of Blacker the Ink. I've read the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, and we covered Unflattening on the show.
Right.
The other 2 books I'm actually not familiar with: Boys Love Manga and Beyond, and Superheroes on World Screens. This I'm better in that category than I have been in previous years. But I think that of those 3 that I read, those are good books, and I'm kind of glad to see things like the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, which is kind of a hybrid book,
right,
and Unflattening, which is a work of scholarship in comics form. Those 2 books that are kind of pushing the boundaries of what a scholarly work is are nice to see in there. Yeah.
For me, for this category this year, is a couple of takeaways. One is it this year, and also in previous years, there seems to be more of a gravitation toward edited collections than there are monographs. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a variety of different reasons for that. So that's one takeaway. The other thing is, getting back to Nick Susanis' Unflattening. I am, and I'm not surprised, or I guess maybe pleased, I don't know how to put it, that this is there. I love the way you put it just now. You said that the inclusion of an Unflattening there kind of expands our understanding of what is considered a scholarly text. I agree with that. I'm just wondering, though, if by nominating it for this category that they felt that, okay, or the judges thought, we won't consider it for another category. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I find that interesting, that if you nominate a title or a creator in one category, does that then, even in an unspoken manner, give the jury in any given year kind of an out to say, okay, we won't nominate it for something else, right? So once you slot it in one way, it makes it difficult to nominate, or less apt to nominate it for something else. So, I mean, I'm glad to see it in the best academic or scholarly work. But, I think that this came out in our discussion of Unflattening last year, is that I like it well enough, but I'm not near as enthusiastic about this book as I think a lot of other people are. I mean, it's getting a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. That's for certain. And I think that one of the reasons why it's getting so much attention is because it's very different. I think the first half of the book is great. The second half of the book is readable. And that's about all I want to say about it. I just don't feel as invested or as enthusiastic about this title as a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah. But again, it does expand how we look at scholarship. Mm-hmm. But I think that this would find a home in, let's say, best new graphic album.
Oh, sure.
Without question.
Or best, reality-based work.
Yeah, true. So under comics-related books, I think this interesting that there are some collections here, as well as more prose-based, as well as hybrid. So you have the comics collections. We have, Dean Mullaney's King of Comics. You have Only What's Necessary. Or no, that's different. But then you have the hybrid of the, Levitz's Will Eisner book that, is very image heavy, but at the same time relies heavily on text. But then there's Harvey Kurtzman, the man who created Mad and revolutionized humor in America by Bill Shelley. I mean, this is, I think, let me say this, back up a bit. Have you looked at Only What's Necessary, the Charles Schultz book?
No.
Okay. I haven't either, but my guess is that it being an Abrams comic arts book, just as Levitz's is, that this is also an image-heavy text.
Okay.
I would guess. Now, that being the case, if that is the case, then I would guess that Shelley's Harvey Kurtzman is the only outright traditional prose text in this category.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. I guess it's more an observation than anything.
Right.
So are there other nominations or categories or issues with this year's nominees that you want to bring up?
No, not really. Like as we had Carol on, and I'm not saying this because we had her on or because she put us on the spot, that, even if there may be things that I wouldn't have personally nominated, I understand the motivation behind most of the nominees here, and there's enough things that I'm truly happy about and was positively surprised to see in there that that outweighs any kind of concern I might have about nominations that I wouldn't have made.
Right. I agree. And again, thanks to Carol for taking the time and talking with us about her experiences as a judge for the 2016 Eisner nominees. Yeah. And if you want to find great books like the ones that were nominated for this year's Eisner Award, then you should visit the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service, dcbservice.com, or you can go to their sister company, In Stock Trades. In fact, I'm sure you can find almost every one of these books there on In Stock Trades. That's instocktrades.com. So whether you go to DCB Service or In Stock Trades, you definitely can't go wrong with those guys. We use them. You should too. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about the 2016 Eisner nominees. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that you can leave us a voice message using SpeakPipe, which is really easy and simple to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are two guys at comicsalternative.com. Or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed where we announce new content to the podcast as well as updates to the blog. You can check out our Twitter feed at @2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn. You can also see us now on Spotify and, if you're an Android user, Google Play Music. But you can find, as always, every single one of our episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and let us know how we're doing.
That's right. So there you go. This year's nominees. We'll see come July who gets the love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see, and maybe there will be people that have been on the show, and even friends of ours that we can go from referring to as Eisner nominated creator to Eisner winning creator.
That's right. So it's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.